We are back to look at another scene from Season 1, Episode 1 of The Witcher. I'm not doing these in chronological order, I am just going through scenes which I think are interesting. Again, mostly focusing on day and night interior shots. This one is about as far as we're going to go towards something which is exterior. It's sort of a courtyard scene. If you haven't watched the series, you should go and watch it now. We are going to be dipping into stuff which is going to reveal things about the plot. So if you have seen this, you will know the scene that I'm talking about just here, looking at the screen. It's when our Witcher is meeting with Mage in episode 1. We go into this kind of illusion that the Mage has created, and the whole thing has a very different feel from any of the other set pieces, in fact any of the other set pieces throughout the entire first season. So what am I going to call out here? I think the first thing to do is just have a look at the colour palette that we've got up on screen, and you can see there's lots of really vibrant greens, but the green is slightly further towards blue, kind of cyan, than it should be. If anyone's ever done any colour correction, any filming, you will know that green is a memory colour. Along with the sky and human skin, these memory colours are things which people instinctively have a feel for, and if you don't get the colour right, it will feel a little bit unnatural. Now that does not mean that when you're colour correcting you can't make things fall, as they have done here, in a slightly more vibrant kind of cyany blue way with the greens. It's a very different kind of green to the yellowy green that you will encounter if you go for a walk in the park, but it does mean that it creates a very unnatural feel, or a hyper-real feel in some respects. When you say green, people probably think of this, but when they see it on screen, this doesn't really equate to the kind of green that you've got in most scenes that you're going to shoot. You can do an interesting experiment with this. Go out, grab some footage of just normal green grass and trees, and then bring it into your color correction software and just pull out all of the green, and then try and pull out all the yellow, and see where the green grass actually sits. More often than not, when you pull the yellows down, you'll pull an awful lot of the saturation out of that grass and the trees, because it's made up of more yellow than green. Conversely, if you're looking at this scene, we've got those bluey kind of shades in there. So, apart from the slightly hyper-real colours, and it goes across the skin tones and everything else in this scene as well, what else have we got? Immediately, the first thing that caught my eye, I'm going to have to disable that correction, is the overexposed highlights within the foreground. That's a really teeth on tinfoil, nails on chalkboard kind of thing for me. When you have a really heavily blown highlight which looks completely clipped, has very hard edges, kind of all the detail is gone. Now they're shooting this on the Panavision DXL2, so it's a very capable camera. This has got to be a creative decision. I don't think that they would have done this by accident. I don't think they've shot the scene and gone, oh no, we need to try and make it look like something, let's just make it all hyper-real. This is clearly a creative choice, so fine, whatever they want to do, but that's something that is noteworthy within the scene. Very vibrant poppy colours and those blown highlights. So let's take that off, step through to the next clip. So you can see these pinks on the left-hand side, greens again. I'm going to disable that node so you can see all the reds. I would say that the skin tone in this sequence is a little bit inconsistent. Go back to the previous shot. Everything feels slightly more hyped and orangey, especially on the Witcher. And his hair, which is sort of whitey, grey-y, depending on the scene that he's in, definitely catching some bluey shades in there, and you can see it in his armor. There's kind of a bluey green hue to everything on him just there. Jump through to this one, and it's been controlled a little bit more. That's to be expected. In a wide shot, you can't control that kind of thing as much as you can in close. You could reduce it in color grade, but because they're hyping everything, perhaps they didn't feel a need, but it definitely feels like it's cleaned up just here. And that could be a little bit to do, if we look at the back of his head, I'm going into really granular detail, I hope no one minds. If you look at the back of his head just here, you can see there's a highlight which is motivated. This area in the back just here is pretty bright. It feels like there's a light coming from that direction. And indeed, if you look at the shadow up here, there is a light source that kind of appears to be blasting up into the ceiling and casting that shadow. So everything here is being lit from underneath and is also casting out towards his head. So you've got that highlight on the back of his head. I noticed this kind of thing. Doesn't really matter. No highlight. It's gone. There's no way this is the highlight that we saw just there. It should be on the edge just here and it should be catching his armor, but it's not there. It's fine. We'll move on to the next bit. Skipping forwards, we've got the reverse shot of this. We can see Geralt is still lit from the same side. He's got a relatively good contrast ratio considering everything is so high key in this setup. We've got a very bright highlight, which is bright to the point of being distracting, but maybe that's the point. Maybe it's meant to feel like this whole place is almost oppressively bright. Over to the left-hand side just there, we can see someone who is probably naked, but thankfully we have our censorship of light just blowing everything out just there. And nothing much to say on this. We do get some blue tone creeping in across here because his sort of leather armor is slightly reflective. So you are going to get, a little bit like with skin, that kind of blue tone creeping in when skylight's coming through. Looking at the spread of tonality just here, it's lots of oranges. In fact, I think that's something which makes this jar a little bit when you jump between those two shots. Now those green tones disappear completely in this close shot. It's something which you see time and again. They can clean up, they can come in with flags, they can control the lighting more, they can change the lighting setups and finesse things. And that green, kind of the cyany green hue, has completely disappeared. In fact, to disable my node just there so you can see that properly. It's gone from his armor. You've got a little bit more detail. You can see a little bit more, but that's definitely dropped right out just there. But apart from that, everything's pretty consistent. You still got the really bright side on the left, catching on his sword. You've got that highlight down there. Looks fine. So jumping through these frames, now the lighting in the scene's coming in really shallow. It's going across and it's catching right underneath his neck and even across here. Got this weird little catch of his cheek, kind of behind his nose. Now, if that was coming in with any more height, then you would lose that for sure. So, for example, if our light was coming in up here, then we would find that that would completely obscure any of these elements that you see just there. That our chin shadow would be coming down here, and it would completely black this area out. We probably wouldn't quite get that or that I've already marked. You'd also probably lose a little bit of this to shadowing around here. So you do get the catch light, and you can see the catch light is actually quite low in his eye. Now that could really go back to the whole scene being that magical light that's slightly oppressive. You can give them a pass on anything. It's like saying they're in the Matrix. It's not meant to be real. But it's worth pointing out because we're looking at the lighting here and we need to know what's happening and how it's being achieved. Now, traditionally, I'll probably be looking at lighting a scene like this with HMIs. If I was outside, certainly you would need to be using much bigger light sources if you want to make sure you get this contrast ratio, make it feel like sunlight and compete with anything which is happening there. Now, imagine this on a set. To get the contrast ratios they've got going on here over the size of the sets that they're dealing with, you definitely are in the 4K range at least. They've definitely got some sky panels on this shoot, and you could probably achieve this look with a sky panel up close, big S360 off to the side, but I feel like it would come across softer than that at the kind of range that you would need to use it to get that effect with everything in the background looking the way that's looking. It'd be interesting to see how they did this one, but my initial thought would just be get a load of HMIs in, get a load of frames, you can do this look, no problem. And that's taking into account the whole setup, not just this close shot. Close shot you could do a little bit easier than that. Okay, now I want to draw attention to something we're going to see as we jump between these two frames. The colour of Geralt's hair changes dramatically. He's clearly stepped out into a green area. There's trees, there's leaves around him, and all of that green bounce light is playing on his hair, and his hair being mostly devoid of pigment will really show that green coming through. You can also see it, I'm going to highlight this in fact, on his armor just here. So all of this area is catching that green bounce, and especially on this side of his hair. This side we've got a lot of light coming in, and you can see catch light in his eyes just there. So that's taken care of, it's cleaning it all up. But on that side, the green's really playing on him. Now, whether or not the green on his hair and his armor are intentional within the scene, it is something which I have had to deal with on sets before. So say we're out in the field and we're doing a shoot with a couple of models, we get quite a lot of return from the grass, if it's a sunny day, of green, which goes right under the model's chins, doesn't look good. We get around this by either cleaning it up, so you do want a kind of skip bounce kind of look. You can throw down either white or some kind of bounce card or something to take that out. Or more often than not, we actually take a lot of negative, we spread it around on the floor, and that eliminates this bounce. Here, I would say, if I was doing this and I had infinite time, I would probably have gone in and just added a 4x4 floppy over his head just there and down the side just there to help take some of that out. Given him a little bit more definition perhaps, and made sure that this is nice and clean. If I had a bit more time, I would have probably set up a bigger frame, taken it a little bit further back so that you could do 2 for 1, take down his side and take down his side, maybe use a 12x12 just slung slightly diagonally. See if I can draw this in, just right over the top of this entire area, add a diagonal, taking down everything on the side of Geralt's face just here and this mage just here. The mage actually has got a decent amount of shadow density on him and his hand and the apple, so that actually works quite well. Why it doesn't get across to Geralt, I don't know, but there it is, it just doesn't. So we'll go back to the full screen view, jump onto the next clip. We've got a real inconsistency with the shadow just there. So that should be completely down on the side of his face. And if we had our way from the previous shot, this would be completely down as well. Maybe just get an edge of highlight or something on that. Also, I'd draw attention to highlight at the top just here. It's really pretty hot, but it's actually going to get hotter in the next, which is a slightly wider take on that. We've lost pretty much the top of his head. It's just clipped all the way off, and the shadow's still not come back just there. So yeah, it's a interesting sequence because there's quite a lot that changes from shot to shot, whether we're looking at one angle towards a mage or the other angle back towards Geralt. Then you have these inconsistencies of shadow and highlight. I feel like because these looks were so far removed from what we see in the rest of the series, which doesn't tend towards these bright, sunny, really hot, high-key scenes, I think this one really stands out for me as something which has a lot of inconsistencies, which probably would have been ironed out if it was something that they were repeating several times, but this is pretty much the only time that we see something that looks like this. But it's interesting to be able to flick through each of those scenes and even within the same exchange see a big shift. Even if we're saying the highlights on his head are sitting around there and we're not getting that shadow side in, well, in this wide it's a much harder highlight. I can't think that the lighting setup between those two would have had to change all that much, because it's not really that different in terms of what we're seeing in the back of the frame. And the only reason I can see for that is either the shot was exposed incorrectly on one of these, and that is genuinely lost information, or they were dealing with real sunlight. Maybe this is an actual location and the levels were changing and they were just having to work with it and balance things out. It's possible, but I don't have enough information about this particular setup to be able to analyze it any further than that. I do enjoy the contrast ratio just here, but it doesn't really play out for the rest of the scenes. So much as I enjoy it, I would have rather seen a consistent set that had this lower contrast ratio with the hard highlight edge than throw in the occasional moody shot. Even that is much, much cleaner than what we see later on. The point of this is to try and learn from these shots what we can do differently or how we can achieve the looks that they have achieved. Some people may be watching this and thinking it's all well and good for me to comment on the inconsistencies and analyze, maybe even overanalyze the frames here. But what qualifies me to do that, I shoot almost daily. We go out and we do big setups. We don't necessarily work on anything of this scale, but we are regularly working and having to create things with light. And I don't want to just commentate on these things. I do want to try and take some of the things that I am seeing just here and recreate them in our studio or in the area around where we're based. We're not going to be hiring any lighting equipment to do this. We are going to be using what we have available in-house. That's limited to 1.6K HMIs as the most powerful lighting source we have. We've got two 1.6K open face lights. We've got another two 1.6K FT systems, which go in paras. They're kind of a more of a fashion thing. So that's four 1.6Ks effectively. And then we've got 1.2K HMI, which is a Fresnel. We've got some tungsten lighting, all relatively low power compared to those HMIs. 4 sets of Kina flows, a load of broncholar LED lights, and then various small LED lights and other fixtures. So we are limited in what we can do with the lighting, but we can be creative with our ratios. And on the close-up shots, going through some of these, most of these are close-ups, albeit with stuff going on in the background. We can recreate the modeling that we're seeing on the faces. We can try and recreate the contrast ratios that we're seeing on the faces. We can work out how we get those catch lights. So we are going to be going through some of my favorite thumbnails from these videos and trying to recreate what we can in the still moving studio and just seeing how you get this kind of shadow density, how you keep that consistency, how you clean up shadows. It's something which we're going to be exploring more, so we're going to call back to this. It isn't just a passive exercise for me. I do want to try and see how you take that into a practical situation and actually apply what we're talking about just here. If you like this content, please comment, please subscribe. I'm going to be breaking down the entire first episode of The Witcher, breaking down the interior day and night scenes. I'm not venturing too much into exterior scenes. This is about as exterior as we're getting with this, but we are going to, perhaps if people enjoy it, progress throughout the rest of the series and start looking at some of those other locations as well.